Tycho, a very fundamental question, I would think. Why is the investment case for responsible investment, more than ever today?
I think if we look at the state of the world, if we look at the issues facing people and planet, we're clearly not making the progress that we should be making on the environmental front, on the social front, and the case for responsible investing is only becoming more important. I'm not implying that it is responsible investing that will be able to solve all the issues, because clearly this is a joint effort between, politicians, civil society, but the world of finance has an important role to play. Capital is a very important factor in how societies move. So the role for responsible investing and for responsible investors is bigger today than it ever was.
What role does the PRI play in the whole scheme of things?
I would say the PRI plays a crucial role as the leading organization bringing together responsible investors with now, I forgot the latest number, is it 130 trillion or 140 trillion? That
depending on the currency, exactly but 140 US dollars,
140 trillion US dollars. Yeah. So that's the only organization in the world that basically brings so much investors, so much asset owners, asset managers, service providers, the entire industry, the entire value chain of how investment decisions are made and how capital is allocated basically is present in the PRI. So the PRI has an incredibly important role to play to keep on spreading best practices across members, keep on bringing people together, like here in Sao Paulo, where people can share experience and can share how we can make more progress towards being better at responsible investing.
Hey Tycho, ever since I've known you, you've championed the need for better ESG data. What does that mean in practice?
If we look at our community of responsible investors, if we as a community want to make more sustainable and more responsible investment decisions, we need to base these investment decisions on facts. And that basically in our world means data. And traditionally, we've had fairly good ways of analyzing expected risks or expected returns in a traditional definition of risk and return. If we now look at a more holistic way of analyzing investment opportunities or analyzing investments that someone holds, we need to expand that to environmental factors, we need to expand that to social factors, factors that both are financially material, but also factors that are societally material. If not, we will never be able to allocate the appropriate amount of capital to the appropriate opportunity set. So in the end, this is all about capital allocation decisions and the input factors that are relevant for those capital allocation decisions. And there we are as an industry still very unsophisticated. We don't really understand what is the real footprint of an investment from a societal perspective. And we're getting better and better factors, and it's definitely improving, but we are still at the very early stages. So this journey of getting more data and more relevant data is still very much ongoing.
All right. So measuring to apply better. All right. How do you see responsible investment evolving in private equity over the next couple of years? Because you do represent the private equity sector in the PRI board. So I suppose you have a view on that.
Yeah, no, we've been tracking and analyzing how private equity institutionalizes ESG integration and sustainability now for over 10 years. So we have data going back since 2014. And if we look at that data set, we see that there has been a tremendous increase in the institutionalization of ESG within the private equity community. So in the early days, we saw about 25% of the private equity managers really taking ESG serious. Now that is much closer to 75 to 80%. And when we say taking ESG serious, that means that they have an ESG policy that describes climate action, that they then also move beyond the policy, but also really start measuring carbon emissions, for example. And there we're talking now about 80% of our private equity portfolio. There is a very important initiative in private equity, which might be new for people who are not part of that industry, which is called EDCI, ESG Data Convergence Initiative, meaning that the entire private equity industry should focus on the most relevant KPIs. And there's basically a bit more than a dozen KPIs that have been defined. And in our portfolio nowadays, 2/3 of the private equity managers already engage on EDCI and track these KPIs. And then I would say that new topics like biodiversity, we already see that about 30% of the private equity managers that we work with takes biodiversity into account, and whenever they're making investment decisions, they're also looking at the biodiversity impact of those investment decisions. So we've come very far. There is clearly still a lot to do, but I'd say we are proud of the progress that we have seen.
And a drive towards consistency as well, right?
A drive towards consistency, because it's very difficult. I mean, what you can't measure, you don't really manage very well. So if you have 10 different private equity managers and they each report to you on ESG metrics that are basically different, you can take a portfolio perspective. And it's important that investors take a portfolio perspective, and that also various investors can compare their metrics with somebody else's metrics, and that we're not comparing apples with oranges, but that we really have the same basis.
Tycho, a question a bit left of center. We are in the second day of PRI in person. Yesterday, I was at a session where a professor of the London School of Business, Ioannis Ioannou, talked about the fact that he was going to be cynical and provocative, as he always tells investors. I'm trying to paraphrase him. He talks to investors and says that they have a choice. Investing in nature-based solutions that is widely underfunded these days, or in oil and gas that have been subsidized, that we have been as a society been subsidizing for decades. It's an insight. It's provocative. It's a bit leading as well. Is it also a bit oversimplifying, or what's your view?
I mean, investors have a choice.
They do?
Investors have a choice, and I think it is for investors to determine what are attractive climate solutions, both from a risk and return perspective, and obviously when it comes to the climate impact that they have. At the same time, if tomorrow we would stop all use of oil and gas as a society, I mean, that wouldn't work. I mean, we wouldn't be able to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
So it's a false choice.
Yeah.
We do need to work on getting more and more effective climate solutions while we are transitioning out of oil and gas. Each investor needs to decide if they wish to keep an exposure to oil and gas. That's, I mean, an individual decision. What we tend to do is try to avoid as much oil and gas exposure as possible. And if we have exposure, then really try to work with people who are actively transitioning an old business model to a new business model that is much more based on renewables and where climate solutions play a much more important role.
Transition is a key word here,
Transition
right?
is the key word.
Absolutely. Tycho, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank
It was a
you.
pleasure.